So we're going to start with the book of Job. So I wanted to start off by just some philosophical, hopefully it's not rambling, but some philosophical thinking. You know, before COVID-19, the world we live in was always unpredictable, except we never really considered it to be unpredictable, especially I would say for most part the technologically sort of stable. I almost want to avoid using Western world because you have stable parts of Asia as well, and Africa. South Africa is also stable, and so I don't want to use the word Western, but I don't know how else to call it, because there are parts of this world that are unstable and unpredictable, and they were unpredictable before COVID. And Afghanistan, for example, comes to mind. You know, we had a church leader from Lebanon join us for a staff meeting. So places that in the world are quite volatile. They don't know if they leave their home, they'll ever come home that day. That type of volatility. But for other chunks of the world, other parts of the world, there was some measure of predictability. I go to work, I come home. I go to school, I come home. There's a repeatability to life. And this notion of control, which is an illusion, but somehow you could kind of work your way into thinking you have some semblance of control. What you put in is what you get out. And life has some form of rhyme or reason. And that's a very modernized version of life analysis. Again, I'm being very overly general, because even in the modern Western world, you have things like existentialism, which was born out of the horrors of Second World War, First and Second World War, where Europe saw their myth of stability and progress be completely dashed in the face of just exceptional inhumanity and sin and death and greed and corruption. I mean, that really made them come up with something like existentialism, like a whole other way of looking at life. So I'm being very overly general and perhaps tad bit simplistic, but there is still that idea of some kind of order to the world, which in the ancient world was just not there. They never even had an illusion of that type of. And so we'll get to that in just a bit. But COVID-19 has definitely challenged our worldview. It has literally challenged our worldview. It's not like we fell sick and we had the flu or something. This is a global pandemic that has challenged all, not just some. And questions of why, and where is God, the unpredictable nature. Two people get COVID, one lives, one dies. One is 50 and one is 25. And if I asked you which one lived, which one died, you would say most probably the 50 died and the 25 lived. And I will tell you, actually it's the other way around. The 50 lived and the 25-year-old died. And that's normal in a sense, right? Normal news. Not normal, it's abnormal, but those are the kinds of news we are familiar with. They may not even be news. They might be real things that has happened in our family and friends, and we know this to be true. And so again, it challenges our modern view of control. There's this sort of illusion that input equal output. So what we put in is what we will get out. And it's more of a one-to-one type analysis, which again, like I said, is an illusion. The reality is so much more complex. Not only do we have one input and one output, that itself is an illusion. We have multiple inputs, and COVID has shown us we're not even in control of our input. When I say input, it means things we can do. So we can exercise, we can take meds, vitamins, we can do all those things, and yet we fall sick. We can quarantine. This has happened to me. I quarantined last year, earlier this year rather, and I didn't go out much and didn't have much contact with anyone, and I got COVID. So I controlled everything I possibly could, and I still had COVID. And that is kind of a new normal, that it really feels chaotic. Even now, when we look ahead, when can we start meeting in person? Will there be another wave? Is this the end? Are we in the middle of the peak? Is there going to come another peak? Are we at the end of all of this? We don't know. And so the ancient world also tried to make sense of how the world operated, just like we do, except I think they had a lot of they had lot less illusions, I think, of control, because they were in the hands of, they were dependent on a whole lot of things, which we are also, but because of modern technology we kind of are shielded from it. For example, where do we get our groceries from? Where do we get our meat from? From Pick and Pay or Woolworths? Well, that's not where it comes from. It comes from the farms. It comes from dairy farms, or meat comes from cows that are, or lambs, or whatever it is that we kill, and all that stuff's happening somewhere else. So in a sense, directly we are dependent on things like weather. So the crops grow and the cows can eat the grass and so on and so forth. But we don't directly see that because we live in a city where we want something, we go to Checkers. The ancient world directly knew that. They knew, not that we don't, we also directly affected, but in a different way, because we go to a grocery store, we don't go to a farm. But they directly saw, hey, no rain, we don't get food. So they understood their life was so dependent on factors way outside their control. They cannot control the rain, neither can we, but they had it in a much more, I guess, visceral way. Does that make sense? And so when we read Job, we want to keep in mind this overall narrative. That was just the way the ancient worldview operated. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And so, first off, let's start with the land of Uz. It's not us, it's Uz, which is not in Israel. So it's a clue. Now, we don't know when it was written, but what we can say is this is the story that's centered on this character who is not from Israel. In other words, they're writing a story about a non-Israelite, but a very God-fearing non-Israelite. To me, this almost sounds like the Good Samaritan parable. Jesus picks the Samaritan as the example of what you should be, even though Jews and Samaritans had mutual enmity. And then it's a date of writing, we're not sure, but it sounds like it's a character similar to Abraham, so perhaps during that time period. And I wanted to just talk about some of the literature that was surrounding that time. And so you have this literature, Sumerian literature, that spoke about the person who didn't know what they did wrong, but they end up with illness. As a result, they experience they're a social outcast, and they confess their sins, they're restored to health. And the philosophy is no sinless child born, and it results in praise. So that's again, this is not, Job was not a unique literature in that ancient world. They asked some of these questions, other cultures around them asked some of these questions also. There's the Akkadian, there's a dialogue between man and God, and it's the same kind of thing where, there's ignorance of the offense, they have illness, but they're restored to health, and that's the story that they tell. There is a Babylonian, and theodicy is just the justice of God. It's the question of why do good things happen to bad people. and bad things happen to good people. Is there any kind of justice of God that's predictable, that we can, based on someone's behavior, determine their experience of life? So Babylonian theodicy has kind of the same thing, where the family is gone, there's poverty, and we'll get to the retribution principle in just a minute, and then gods make people with evil intentions and prone to suffering. That was their answer to this age-old question. And then you have Job. He claims righteousness and piety, and Yahweh offers new perspective based on wisdom, on why things happen, even when it seems they shouldn't happen, especially bad things happening to those that seem to be good. And so let's talk about the retribution principle. It's a very common ancient philosophy, and not just ancient, but even today. You get what you deserve. The idea that, let's say that someone kicks a dog and is mean and rude and cruel, that what they would get is proportional to their cruelty, to their character, and that's the universe operating in balance, so to speak. Someone's really generous towards the poor and is really kind to animals and just very giving, and cares for people and creation and so on. Good things start to happen to them. It feels like everything is operating the way it should. And so that's, in effect, is the retribution principle. Retribution is the consequences of your actions. So the righteous will prosper and the wicked will suffer. Makes sense. Would you agree with that? Yeah. That makes sense. When you're in class and you see a kid is a bully and is mean and he's just obnoxious, what do you hope would happen to that kid? That the teacher would catch that kid being obnoxious and a bully, and the kid gets his comeuppance, right? He gets what he deserves. But that same kid, it was obnoxious, it was a bully, mean, cruel, rude, and accidentally finds 100 Rand bill and rubs it in everyone's face, then viscerally, that is wrong. That is so wrong. Cannot believe that happened to that kid. That kid is the last person who should ever deserve something nice happening to them, right? And so that's the retribution principle. The extension of that idea is, if you are suffering, then it must mean you are wicked. That's the extension of the retribution principle. Good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. If bad things are happening to you, then the conclusion is, you must not be a good person. And if you're prospering, you must be righteous. It just is what it is. So John 9, granted this was written a long time after, and this happened a long time after Job, but notice that mindset is still very much part of the DNA. As Jesus went along, he saw a blind man from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Because their worldview is, this person's blind, they must have done something wrong. But they were born blind. So it's one thing you become blind after you're born, then you did something wrong after you're born. But the fact you're born blind tells me, well, how could you have done something wrong in your mother's womb, right? It's kind of hard to do that. So how do you explain that? It must be his parents. They did something wrong. They sinned. or this man somehow did it, before he was even born, sinned, and was therefore born blind. Now, Hindu philosophy would say that this person possibly, this person was experiencing karma. Now, karma is not just what you do in this life. In fact, the idea of karma is what you have done in the previous life. That then is now you live out in the present life. And then whatever you do in the present life, you'll live out in the next life. So if you do bad this life, next life you could come back as a cockroach. Because that's how they explained what they were observing. Again, notice that observable, they saw people doing very well. One person's born in a rich family, one's born in a poor family. How do you explain that? Well, in their past life, perhaps this kid lived a good life, and so in this life they are now reaping the fruit of what they lived in the past life. Whereas this kid must have lived an evil life, or whatever it is, that caused them to now live this life as poor, or as physically challenged. So that's the Hindu way of explaining. So I'm just giving you the philosophy behind Job, because these are thoughts that we also can entertain. It's not that far-fetched. These are not crazy people telling these crazy stories. Like, we can also say, okay, why is this happening? Why are some people in this state? Why are some people in that state? We also observe that there's two kids born in the same family. Dad's alcoholic, mom's alcoholic, dysfunctional as crazy, and one kid turns out to be this incredible human being who serves, becomes a psychologist or a doctor to help people, doesn't ever drink, and the other kid is repeating the same pattern. And then we try to figure out what is going on. The variables seem consistently the same, but the outcome seems so different. So how do you explain that? So that's kind of what was happening with Job. Does that make sense? So Job 1. How is Job different from other ancient Near Eastern literature? So Job 1 verse 8. Then the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." So is Job a righteous man or not? Yes, clearly. So right there, the retribution principle says what? No harm. We should prosper. So right there, Job is different from other ancient Near Eastern literature in that clearly Job is righteous. Therefore, retribution principle should dictate that he should prosper and not be harmed. Unfortunately, in Job 1:9-12, does Job fear God for nothing? Satan replied. Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. The Lord said to Satan, "Very well then, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger." Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. So even though Job is clearly righteous, he's going to experience harm. It's not consistent with the retribution principle, which is the common way of thinking in the ancient Near East. So that makes sense. Like when we read Job, we're reading a countercultural narrative to their culture, but also to our culture. We're not that different. We assume good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. When good things happen to bad people, bad things happen to good people, we too get a bit concerned. When we step out, it's outside of the norm, it feels like. The other concept is this idea of the Great Symbiosis, which is so important for us to understand when we read not just Job, but also the Bible. The idea is very simple, and we spoke about this yesterday with the Stargate SG-1. The ancient Near East belief is that gods don't need humans and were content to live without them. They created the cosmos, they built cities, and they lived together. So the cosmos, the creation itself, was for the gods. But over time, they started to get a bit tired. They started to get a bit tired of doing all the menial tasks, the gods that is, right? And they started to wonder, hey, wouldn't it be nice if we had had bunch of minions running around doing our tasks, doing our labor, so we get to enjoy and rest. And that's why humans were created, to provide for needs. And so it's a symbiosis, means it's a mutually beneficial relationship. So the humans will serve God, and gods in turn protect humans. So they both need each other. And that's how the ancient Near Eastern worldview operated. Gods need us, we need them, and everything is in balance. So when a person suffered, it's usually because they did something ritually inappropriate. So I'm just giving an example. This is let me just think back to my day as a Hindu, because you had these rituals you had to practice, and I can't really think through I can't remember the details, But let's say, for example, I was to go to the temple and offer something, food to the gods. Now I'm supposed to go in. I'm supposed to take off my shoes. I'm supposed to ring the bell. I don't know if you've seen the bell that you're supposed to ring a bell. That's waking up the gods because they might be sleeping. So you have to ring the bell 3 times. For example, I'm just giving an example. Then you go and you light a lamp. One of those like lamps with the wick, and then you're supposed to show the lamp 3 times up and down, 1, 2, 3, and then you're supposed to prostrate, you bow down, and then you bring the food that you have to offer, and you make sure you're bowing down, you're not looking at the idols, making eye contact, and you back up, and you leave the temple, and not showing your back to the idols, because that's disrespectful. Let's say that's the ritual. And I come in, and I have done this as a kid. I accidentally went into a temple with my shoes on. I was probably 4 or 5. I got yelled at for it. I'm 5, what do I know? But so let's say I did go into the temple with my shoes on. I didn't remove them. That's a strike against the ritual purity. And then instead of ringing the bell, I forget to ring the bell. Instead of offering the lamp, lighting the lamp and showing it 3 times, I only do it 2 times. And instead of backing out of I show my back to the gods, for example. That means I've ritually messed up, and then that explains why I am in the state I'm in. I come out and I get hit by a car. Aha, see, you were ritually messing up, and the gods messed you up because you messed up your ritual offering. So that's part of the thinking process. So there's a symbiotic relationship. I do certain things for gods in a certain way as they have deemed right, and they then protect me. If I fail to follow that rituals, then I will face consequences. So, but in Job 22, look at what Eliphaz says. Not that this guy was we should take it with a grain of salt. But still, check out what he says. Can a man be of benefit to God? Can even a wise person benefit him? And that is a completely different worldview. And again, if you read through the canonical, you have questions like, does God need human hands to build him a temple? Do you understand? So that's part of the biblical worldview. God did not create us because He needs us. He doesn't need us. He loves us. He wants a relationship with us. So hopefully that makes sense. As we read Job, we can see the countercultural philosophy that Job is presenting. This is not a great symbiosis. This is not the retribution principle. Then what is it? Well, it is this, and that's where the question is not answered. But what we can tell, which Job never finds out, is that there is this thing happening between God and the accuser. And then you start to wonder what that's about. And we don't get all the answers we would like, but it's clearly telling the culture then that it's not the retribution principle, you're wrong, and it's not the great symbiosis, you're wrong. So I do want to talk about the canon, the canonical reading of Job. Can you think of another instance where a righteous man and his three useless friends, and the righteous man is navigating his condition, and with his three friends who turn out to be pretty useless?
I figured Jesus and the Godhead.
Yes, that's exactly, it's so there's a canonical reading of Job that can also be very helpful. Because like Michael said in the Psalms, it's such a myth and yet such a strongly held belief that you become a disciple of Jesus, everything is going to work out great. And it's I've heard disciples say this, I've heard campus students say this, I have felt this, I have experienced this. I almost left God because I felt that what have I done? My first year of discipleship, things were going great. But towards the end of the first year and going into my second, it was terrible. And I wasn't doing well at school, at university. And I thought once I became a disciple, everything should just be great. Yeah. And it wasn't. And so I started to doubt whether I made the right decision. I almost left God. Literally, I was one step from saying, this is all hogwash, I'm done, I'm leaving. And maybe what we should do, now that I think of it, every young Christian should maybe have a Bible study on suffering from the scriptures, because it's so clear. Now I look back after 20 years and I'm like, what was I on about? Why was I thinking the way I was thinking? Because the scriptures are clear. Jesus is clear. He's righteous and yet he suffers. Who am I then? How much more, right? Yeah. But that's kind of the mindset. And so reading Job canonically can help us, even as ministers, personally, but also when we minister. And maybe I should work on the new lesson for Christians on suffering. Because I think it's helpful. Because so many times we might want to leave because we think suffering is not good. But suffering is part of discipleship. In fact, a case could be made, without suffering there is no discipleship. Right? The narrative, so again, the genre of wisdom literature. So again, like we looked in Proverbs, when you read wisdom literature, be mindful. It's not do it, see it type literature or genre. And when you read wisdom literature, you're meant to ask questions. You're meant to reflect. You're meant to observe. You're meant to contemplate. And also because it's a narrative, you follow the rules of the genre of narrative. Like asking who's the protagonist, the antagonist, who's the foil. Like Elihu in this case kind of is presenting a different point of view. Looking at the narrative from different viewpoints, it really helps to bring Job alive. It's a great story. And it's a great ministry practical that when we sit with those we suffer, learn from Job's friends and not engage in deep theology or any theology. Sit with them, love them, encourage them, listen, and not debate. And then for theology, I've left with questions. Because I think that is what one of the ways to read wisdom literature is actually to ask some questions. So questions like, who is wise? So you look at Job and his friends and God and Satan. So first off, even there you can look at all the characters, his wife. Who is wise? Questions like, does God care? That's a really real question. Does he really care about us? How should we respond to those who suffer? What challenges us about Job? How does Job change us when we encounter suffering? So there's some great questions. That's just a few. But again, going back to Proverbs, I just want to close that loop with disciplining our children. It's the same idea that we are reading these texts with humility and with awareness of the genre and asking questions. Wisdom literature is meant to be read wisely by asking some of these questions and applying them wisely. They're not meant to be read in unwisely or simply. And that's one of the challenges of Job, is we wish we had the answers, because we would like to have simple answers. We would like to believe that when we do all the right things, things will go right for us. And when we do all the wrong things, things will go wrong for us. But we know that when we do all the right things, things still don't go right for us. And when we do all the wrong things, things can go right for us. But wisdom will tell us that just because you do all the right things and sometimes things go right for you, does not mean you carry on that path of folly. And that goes back to Proverbs 9. Which temple will we draw wisdom from? Yahweh or idols?